Salam, peace be upon you, and the mercy and blessings of God. My name is Muhammad Layak Sadiqi, the father of Holophase. Remember the language we are learning. There is one field, phi, the holophase. One continuous cyclic movement from which all of reality unfolds. When phi begins to change, its first derivatives appear. And with them, the three dimensions show themselves at once. Time as omega, space as kappa, and motion as nu, built from both. Every higher derivative is a finer question about how phi changes, and each one casts three shadows together: a time shadow, a space shadow, and a motion shadow. These echoes mix and weave into one another, forming the patterns we call fields, particles, bodies, thoughts, and worlds. In this picture, everything that exists is a living tapestry of phi, endlessly echoing through its derivatives and their dimensional shadows. Today, we give knowledge a permanent name and a recorded life story. This is part 53, and its mission is simple to say, but hard to build. We solve the problem of identity over time. We define the rule, identity, and lineage persistence object. That sounds like a long title, so let me translate it into everyday language. We are building a birth certificate and family tree for scientific rules. Not as poetry, as infrastructure, as protection. Because without identity, knowledge becomes fog. People repeat the same name and think they mean the same thing, while in reality they are using different versions, different scopes, and different assumptions. And then they fight. Or worse, they build machines, policies, and lives on mismatched meanings. Our core question today is about the self of a scientific idea. What makes a rule the same rule, even as it changes and improves? To feel the problem, imagine a person you have known since childhood. They were 5 years old once. Now they are 40. Their height changed, their voice changed, their face changed, their job changed, their beliefs may have changed. Yet you still say it is the same person. How do you know? Because identity is not one frozen snapshot. Identity is a continuous story with recorded continuity. Now imagine the opposite. Imagine a village where people never record births, never keep names stable, never keep family histories, and everyone is known by nicknames that change with the season. One year, someone is called the tall one. Next year, he is called the farmer. Later, he is called the man with the limp. If a court case happens, if land ownership is disputed, if inheritance is questioned, chaos follows. Not because people are evil, but because identity was not preserved. Science has the same vulnerability. We say Newton's law of gravity as if it is one single object. But is it? The number we now call the gravitational constant has been refined. The scope where Newton works is better understood. The formulations used in textbooks differ. Engineers use approximations that early Newtonians never wrote. And when Einstein arrived, many people casually say, Einstein corrected Newton, as if Newton's rule evolved into Einstein's rule. But did it evolve, or was it replaced? Without a disciplined identity and lineage, we cannot answer this cleanly. This leads to muddled histories, false debates, and the loss of the nuanced story of progress. So today we build a system where every rule is treated not as a floating equation, but as a tracked object, something with a permanent ID and the recorded lineage of every change it ever went through. Think of software. A serious software project has version control. Every file has a history of changes. You can ask, who changed this line, when, and why? You can return to an older version, reproduce an old result, and compare it to the new one. Without version control, teams break each other's work, bugs multiply, and no one knows which version is running. Part 53 is version control for laws. Now let's keep everything audio friendly. We will speak in clear terms, and when we use symbols, we will name them out loud. We start with a rule. Call it Rule G, like Rule G. Rule G is a constraint written in canonical form, meaning it is written clearly with definitions, units, and scope. In previous parts, we learned how to write rules in canonical form and how to archive them. Now we add something new, identity. We assign the rule a permanent identifier. We call it the rule ID. Say it as rule ID. This rule ID is not the human nickname like Ohm's law or Newton's law. Names are ambiguous across cultures, languages, and eras. The rule ID is a structured code that never changes. For audio, imagine something like RID, physics, gravity, 001, year 1687. That would mean this is the first gravity rule registered in the physics registry, born in the year 1687. You can shorten it in speech, but the structure matters. The key is the ID stays forever, even if we refine the rule's constants or adjust its scope. Now attach the second component, the lineage object. Say it as lineage object, like a family tree file. The lineage object records the entire life of the rule. What data first suggested it, what grammar family it belongs to, what scope it originally claimed, what tests it passed, what tests it failed, and every update event: refine, narrow scope, expand scope, split, merge, downgrade, retire. So the rule object is a pair, rule ID plus lineage. In audio, rule object equals rule ID plus lineage. That is the core structure. Now, why is the triunit essential here? Because in Holophase, a rule's identity is not just a sentence. It is a constraint that binds omega, kappa, and nu in a specific way. Omega is the time shadow, how phi changes with time. Kappa is the space shadow, how phi changes with position. Nu is the motion readout, the coupling of omega and kappa. A rule's identity is tied to what it constrains in these three dimensions together. So the identity system asks three questions for each rule. 1. What omega constraint does this rule impose? Does it fix a rhythm, a decay rate, a persistence condition, a timing relation? 2. What kappa constraint does it impose? Does it enforce a spatial pattern, a symmetry, a correlation length, a boundary condition? 3. What nu constraint does it impose? Does it specify how motion or propagation behaves, how couplings work, how flux flows, how response follows action? If a revision changes the answer to any of these in a material way, that may not be a minor update. It may be a mutation. And sometimes, a mutation is so large that it is no longer the same rule. It becomes a new rule that deserves a new rule ID, and the lineage should record the split. Here is the everyday picture. Imagine a family recipe. If you refine the salt amount because you measured better, it is still the same recipe. That is a refine event. But if you replace wheat flour with rice flour and change the cooking method completely, it may become a different dish. It might be a sibling dish in the same family, but it deserves a new name and a new card. That is a split. Science needs that same honesty. Now let's define the kinds of lineage events in everyday language. Birth of the rule, with the original phi sentences and the initial canonical form. Refine. Same structure, better numbers, tighter uncertainties. Scope narrow. Rule does not hold as widely as claimed, so we tighten omega kappa nu boundaries. Scope expand. New tests show it holds more widely, so we extend the boundaries. Split. One name was hiding multiple constraints, so we create sibling rule IDs. Merge. Two rules are unified as special cases of a deeper rule. Downgrade. Certification tier lowered because new evidence weakened it. Retire. Superseded, archived with honor, linked to the newer rule. These events form the life story. Now bring in energy as tally. Energy in Holophase is the ledger signature derived from omega kappa nu consistency under a specific rule. When the rule changes, the ledger may change. The lineage object lets us audit why. Was the ledger updated because we improved instruments? That is a refine. Was it updated because we discovered leaks in a certain regime? That is scope narrowing with a recorded failure mode. Was it updated because we adopted a broader framework that changes what counts as the tally? That might be a merge or a split into a new identity. Without lineage, people can fudge the books and pretend the law never changed. With lineage, every ledger change is traceable. That is honesty made permanent. Now let's formalize, but speak it clearly. At any time, a rule has a state at time t. That state includes the canonical form at that time, G at time t, the scope at that time, omega range, kappa range, nu regime, the certification label at that time, evidence tier, independence, stability, and failure modes. So the lineage is a sequence of these states, each tagged with an event: genesis, refine, scope narrow, scope expand, split, merge, downgrade, retire. Now, what does the firewall do here? The firewall becomes the registrar and lineage auditor. When someone proposes a new rule, the firewall demands: show the rule ID and lineage object. If it is a new rule, the firewall creates a new rule ID and genesis record. If it is a modification of an existing rule, the firewall demands that the modification be logged as a lineage event, with justification and evidence. No silent edits are allowed. Silent edits are how knowledge gets corrupted. Someone changes a parameter just a little, publishes a new plot, and later people cite the rule as if it always had that value. Then contradictions appear, and no one knows why. The lineage system prevents that. Now let's state the prediction that this identity system makes. Prediction. If two laboratories claim to be using the same law, and they are truly using the same rule ID and the same version, then after translating their measurements into the canonical form, they will produce compatible omega kappa nu constraints and compatible energy tallies within the declared uncertainties of that version. In plain words, identity guarantees consistency. Now the falsification condition. If the same human-readable name, like gravity, yields incompatible omega kappa nu constraints across contexts, and there is no lineage explanation, the firewall intervenes. It splits the identity, creates multiple rule IDs, downgrades the confused entities to scoped candidates until independently validated, and logs an anomaly describing the confusion and its resolution. This is how we prevent endless debates where people argue with the same words but different meanings. The firewall forces clarity by splitting the name into tracked objects. Now make this every day. Imagine two valleys. Both say they follow the rule of sharecropping. In one valley, the tenant gives 1/3 of the harvest. In another, the tenant gives 1/2, but the owner provides seed and tools. In casual speech, both are sharecropping. But the flow of resources is different. The timing is different. The division is different. Their omega kappa nu constraints are not the same. A firewall audit would not merge them. It would give them different rule IDs. Later, if a deeper rule unifies them, that can be a merge event under a more general ancestor. But until then, separate identities prevent analytical confusion. Now I want to teach you the skill you gain today, the skill of a genealogist of knowledge. A genealogist does not accept a name. They ask for pedigree. They ask, who are your parents? Where were you born? What is your history? What documents prove continuity? You must do the same with rules. When you hear a rule, ask 4 questions. 1. What is its rule ID? Not the nickname, the tracked identifier. 2. What version is being used? Because version matters. 3. What is its lineage? What tests did it survive? What anomalies exist? What scope changes happened? 4. Has it split or merged? Are there siblings people confuse it with? This transforms you from a passive recipient of authority into an active user of certified tools. Now, let's make it concrete with gravity, told as identity. Newtonian gravity gets a rule ID. Physics, gravity, 001, year 1687. Genesis. Newton proposes the inverse square form. Refined events follow. Constants measured more precisely. Scope is clarified. Works for weak fields and speeds much less than light speed. Anomalies appear. Mercury's orbit discrepancy is logged. Then Einstein arrives. The registry does not edit Newton into Einstein. It creates a new rule ID. Physics, gravity, 002, year 1915. The lineage records that Einstein subsumes Newton as a limit case. Newton is retired from foundational status, but remains operational inside its scope. History is honest. Newton becomes a scope tool. Einstein becomes a broader tool. Progress looks like deepening continuity, not chaos. Now, what is allowed and forbidden? Allowed. Revise and improve rules, but every change must be logged as a lineage event. Allowed. Create new rule IDs when the core triunity constraint changes. Allowed. Split confused rules into siblings. Allowed. Merge rules when a deeper grammar unifies them. Forbidden. Use a rule without its rule ID and version. Forbidden. Silently change parameters, scope, or meaning. Forbidden. Claim incompatible formulations are the same law without a documented merge. Practical consequence. A rule without rule ID and lineage is uncertified and ephemeral. A rule with confused identity is downgraded until clarified. A rule with clean identity and lineage becomes safe to cite and safe to build upon, because anyone can retrieve the exact version and scope. Now, why does this matter for Holophase? Because Holophase is not only proposing new physics, it is proposing new civilization-scale scientific hygiene, an epistemic firewall that protects truth from social decay. Rule identity is the layer that protects truth from temporal decay. It ensures that even if languages change and institutions collapse, the identity of a rule remains stable, and its life story remains readable. Now let's walk through what it looks like, step by step, when a rule enters the registry and grows up. Imagine a newborn baby arriving at a hospital. The nurse does not say, "A baby exists, good luck." The nurse writes a record, date and time, weight, fingerprints, parents, and an identification number. Later, when the child gets vaccines, each vaccine is logged. When the child changes address, it is logged. When the child travels, stamps appear. When the child becomes an adult, the record is still traceable back to birth. A rule is treated the same way. Step 1 is the birth claim. A team brings 5 sentences, measured observations in licensed windows. They say, we see a repeated pattern. We think a constraint exists. Step 2 is the first formulation. They write a canonical statement, rule G, with definitions, units, and omega kappa nu scope. Step 3 is identity assignment. The registrar asks, is this truly new, or is it a refinement of an existing rule ID? If it is new, a fresh rule ID is minted. If it is a refinement, the old rule ID remains, and the proposal is treated as a candidate lineage event. Step 4 is event classification. The firewall compares the old and new constraint. Does the omega part change? Does the kappa part change? Does the new coupling change? If the structure is the same and only numbers improve, it is refine. If the valid domain shrinks, it is scope narrow. If tests extend it, it is scope expand. If the core relationship changes, the firewall considers split or a new rule ID. Step 5 is stamping and linking. The new state is written into Lineage, with a timestamp, the evidence that motivated it, and links to test logs. Step 6 is public release. Only after this does the updated version become citable as an official version. Now think about how this prevents a common disaster, the silent coefficient problem. A paper from 10 years ago uses one constant. Another paper uses a slightly different constant. A student copies a third number from a blog. They argue about why predictions differ, but the real reason is they were never using the same version. With rule IDs and lineage, the argument disappears. Bring this to everyday tools. A car. People say Corolla as if that is one thing, but there are years, engines, and software updates. If you order a spare part without the exact model and year, you may get something that almost fits and fails dangerously. Mechanics know this. They use identity codes. Science needs the same discipline. Now hear the philosophical insight. Identity is a promise of continuity. When we give a rule a stable identity, we promise future humans. You will not have to guess what we meant. You will be able to audit us. That is why Lineage must also record negative knowledge. Not only successes, but failures. Scar tissue. Near misses. Alternative formulations rejected. This prevents future generations from repeating dead ends and prevents the myth that rules were born perfect. You already live this discipline. You check expiration dates. You see software version numbers. You see batch numbers and recalls. You see transaction reference numbers. We are simply applying everyday responsibility to scientific rules. And remember this. Tracking lineage does not kill creativity. Creativity lives in discovery. Discipline begins when you claim, others can safely build on this. So hold the final mantra of part 53. If you cannot name the rule's ID, you do not yet know which rule you are holding. If you cannot state its version, you do not yet know what it says. If you cannot see its lineage, you do not yet know why you should trust it. A rule is not an equation. A rule is a tracked object with a permanent ID and a recorded life. Salam and peace be upon you.